Patch 12.23 is upon us with some nerfs, some buffs, and some other changes too. Starting with nerfs, we have Lilia, where she is losing a good amount of damage on her Q. Next, Mordekaiser's passive does massively less damage against monsters, and he'll only be able to stack his passive against large monsters. Next, we have Shyvana, and after a target has been hit by her E, they will now take slightly reduced damage from each follow-up auto attack. Following this, we have Syndra, where the upgraded bonus damage on the W is being turned down from 15% to 12%. Her E has a 2-second longer cooldown at each rank, and will also now scale less hard with AP. Next, we have Trundle, who is losing a good amount of base attack speed, and the damage on his ultimate is being reduced at levels 11 and 16. And the final nerf goes to everyone's least favourite cat on a book of Yuumi. The cooldown of her passive is being massively increased, and her ultimate will now only root for 1.25 seconds. The first buff goes to Amumu, where he gets 11 extra health per level, and his W and E will deal additional damage as they're leveled up. However, he pays the small price of his Q costing 10 additional mana at all levels. Next, we have Cho'Gath, where his passive will now restore more mana per enemy killed. His W will deal more damage at all levels, and his ultimate has reduced cooldown at levels 11 and 16. Following this, we have Cassante, who is getting increased base health regen and health growth per level. Also, his E will now soft reset his autos, and will work as a full auto attack reset in all out form. Next, Kane's Shadow Assassin form has increased passive damage, and the healing on the E now scales higher with AD. Malphite's E has higher base damage, scales better with armor, and the mana cost will now stay at 50 at all ranks. Following this, we have Maokai, where his passive will now scale higher with his health as the game goes on, and the damage on his Q is being slightly increased early game and greatly increased when leveled. Also, it will deal 40 additional damage to monsters at all ranks. Next, Sion is getting 70 additional base mana and 10 extra mana per level, in addition to his Q dealing 10 more damage at all levels. Following this, Tahm Kench is now getting higher AP scaling on all of his abilities, as well as his Q healing more per missing health and his E storing more damage as grey health. Next, Zac will heal more from his passive as the game goes on. His Q's cooldown is being reduced by 1 second at all ranks and will now scale even higher with his health. And finally, we have a mini rework for Zeri. Her base stats are all being adjusted to these. Her passive now scales slightly higher with AP but loses a lot of mobility. Her Q is getting reduced range but deals more damage. Her W now deals physical damage and scales higher with AD and less with AP. The E will now cost slightly more mana early and slightly less mana later, and the cooldown is being reduced early game. And after use, her attacks will deal bonus magic damage per hit with additional damage to the first target hit. The ultimate now deals slightly more damage, however no longer gives her attacks increased damage. If the ultimate hits at least one enemy, Zeri gains movement speed and attack speed. This buff will be refreshed to 1.5 seconds each time she attacks or uses a Q. As for adjustments, we also have many changes to Dr. Mundo. There's a number of small, less important changes, but the overall feel is he'll be slightly worse early to be truly unkillable late game, especially with his W having a new passive where he gets grey health which will regenerate when out of combat. The other adjustment goes to Caedrel. His Q now gives him a stronger shield much faster, and the E no longer stacks per spell used nearby and simply has a cooldown of 21 seconds, which goes down by 2 per rank. And other champion spellcasts reduce the cooldown by 1 second. As for items, Bulbasaur will now provide less tenacity, Hydra deals less splash damage and no longer gets Omni-Vamp with stacks, and Sunfire costs 100 less while giving 100 more health. In the jungle, companions now eat 2 treats if available, but they only grant 35 gold each. In the lobby, Rito will now recommend runes for you, and you can now swap your pick order just like in Wild Rift.